We stood here bipartisan in April, as soon as he made that announcement, and said, if you don't start getting people out right now, you are giving them a death sentence. If you pull our military assets out before you get Americans or allies out, you're consigning them to death, like this school principal and his family. Final thing, America is going to face Al-Qaeda 3.0. The intelligence community has been clear and has briefed us repeatedly. The Taliban taking over means Al-Qaeda 3.0 comes roaring back. Except now we're in a worse position than we were before 2001. We have no bases in the region. Our local allies are being hunted down as we speak. And as you've heard today, the Taliban are going to be armed to the teeth so that when future American soldiers have to go back in to deal with the problem and deal with the incompetence of this administration, how many are going to die now? Because they're going to have to fight their way through our own equipment, our own damn equipment, to deal with Al-Qaeda 3.0. Are we going to have another Pulse nightclub? Are we going to have another San Bernardino? Are we going to have another 9/11 because of that incompetence? Well, this Congress is going to lead. Our offices right now are operations centers, calling gate guards, calling the Kabul airport, guiding people through, telling them how to avoid Taliban checkpoints. Our own Congress. It's unbelievable, the lack of leadership. So I 100% agree. That blood is and will be on Joe Biden's hands, and this Congress will hold him accountable. Thank you very much.
I want to thank my colleagues.
And thank you for your leadership in pulling us together to try to deal with this crisis. I want to thank also so many congressional offices, so many of you, Republican and Democrat, where congressional offices, members of Congress and their staffs have had to step up and step in with so many other veterans groups to try to save Americans and to try to save our allies. And frankly, have had to fill the void of this administration's leadership. Just this morning, I personally was on the line with 2 American citizens and their children outside the gate of Kabul International and had to give them the heartbreaking news that I understood it to be closed. We're now trying to smuggle them out through other means, and that is happening organically from veterans, from Republican and Democrat offices, from nonprofits. Basically everybody but this administration is getting Americans and our allies out. So where do we go from now? I think you're already seeing the State Department and the White House try to set the stage that there's good terrorists and bad terrorists, that the Taliban have moderated, that we can trust them to get the rest of our citizens out and to not harm our allies. Well, let me ask you this. There is a Navy veteran, Mark Frericks, that's been held hostage for the last year and a half. So is he free to go? What we have just handed the Taliban and these terrorist groups is a mountain of leverage on a silver platter. Every time they want money, every time they want recognition, every time they want economic assistance or access to billions in foreign reserves, they can walk down the street and take another hostage. We have to remember, too, that this same thinking, appeasing terrorists, concession after concession after concession, the same team that's around Biden was around Obama, that did Benghazi, that did the Bergdahl trade, that recklessly pulled us out of Iraq, that led to the ISIS caliphate and attacks around the world, including inspired attacks here in the homeland, that led to the Iran deal. And they're exercising that same playbook. You cannot appease terrorists. They understand strength, and they understand leverage, and they understand military might. And we're showing none of that right now. A Middle East ambassador just reached out to me and said the word across the region is that jihad is won and democracy is lost. That's shameful. And that is going to make America less safe and get future American soldiers killed that have to go back to deal with this mess. You know, if this administration isn't going to lead, then Congress will, and our veterans community will. We are going to step up, but it is absolutely shameful that future American blood, Allied blood, and soldiers' blood are going to be on this administration's hands for this mess that they've created, this self-imposed disaster. Thank you, Leader, and I yield.
I'd like to turn now to Afghan veteran Jim Banks.
Representative Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to address this narrative that we consistently hear from political appointees in the Pentagon, from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that Republicans are blowing these issues out of proportion, that we're exaggerating, and I cannot state strongly enough. If we did not have cadets, military members, their families bringing these issues to us on a consistent basis, we wouldn't be addressing them here. I have an entire binder of issues, some of them from, one of them from a conservative Muslim family, another of them from a conservative Jewish family. And the question I would ask the other side of the aisle, the ranking member, and you all is, why weren't they comfortable in an inclusive environment going through their chain of command? And that's something that I think I encourage you to deeply, deeply think about. But in that vein, General Clark, an Air Force Academy professor, wrote a Washington Post op-ed that she proudly teaches critical race theory at the Air Force Academy. I want to read to you some quotes from the leading proponents of this ideology, because I don't think Americans know truly how divisive and destructive this ideology is. One of them we have here: a positive white identity is an impossible goal. White identity is inherently, because of the skin color apparently, is inherently racist. White people do not exist outside the system of white supremacy. This isn't 100, 200 years ago. This is today. This does not mean that we should stop identifying as white and start claiming to be some other type of race. To do so is to deny the reality of racism in the here and now. This isn't a way of thinking or a history class. This is present-day indoctrination. And this denial of that would be colorblind racism. So rather, this author strives to be less white and therefore less racially oppressive because of his privilege. That's from the author of White Fragility. General Clark, do you agree with that statement?
Sir, what I will tell you is you mentioned our instructor who talked about teaching.
It's currently still teaching at the Air Force Academy, correct?
Absolutely, yes, sir. Who talked about teaching about critical race.
Do you agree with that statement? I only have 2 minutes left for the American people to ask you these questions.
Well, sir, I'd like to talk about your question about critical race theory and the instructor, if that's okay first.
Very quickly, please. But first, do you agree with that? I mean, you're the leader of the institution. There's faculty members on your staff. Do you agree with that type of sentiment?
Sir, that's not what she was espousing. She was not indoctrinating.
White Fragility is a leading book in the critical race theory mantra of books and thinking.
Yes, sir. She was encouraging the discourse on the topic, the civil discourse, so that our cadets could understand.
Would you encourage someone who says they're teaching white supremacy to have that discourse?
Sir, we encourage all civil discourse so that our cadets can learn how to think.
Right. At a Cal Berkeley, fine. But in an institution that's teaching our leaders to defend future military members, to die for civilian institutions that are being described as inherently racist and a class of people because of their skin color, that's offensive. That runs against your priorities.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. We're teaching critical thinkers, though, and we want our cadets.
Respectfully, that's racist thinking. But just
I'm not.
Just so that we're clear, this was a speaker that was at the Air Force Academy National Character and Leadership Ceremony, Dr. Eddie Glaude, that spoke to current-day cadets. Every reckoning in the United States has carried with it betrayal. At every moment in which a new America is on the verge of being reborn, the umbilical cord of white supremacy has been wrapped around the baby's neck, choking the life out of it. This was at a conference just last year. I think, again, this type of rhetoric, because we hear this from the other side as well, of course we want to teach history. Of course we want equal opportunity for every American. This is divisive. This isn't what unifies us. So I just have one more question. And I'll throw it over to you, Admiral Buck. Do you have any empirical evidence? Do you have any data, for example, that shows that a submarine crew is more combat ready or effective because of the diversity mix, because of the different mix of, say, skin color? Mr. Chairman? No, I absolutely agree, but we don't see in many box checking, we're not looking for religious diversity or other types of diversity, or frankly, my wife who looks white, but she's 100% Arab. She doesn't have a box to check, but I would like to reclaim my time a few seconds just to ask the question, Mr. Chairman, for the interruption.
We'll try to do another round of questions later, and we'll have an opportunity to do that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Now Representative Waltz.
Here's the bottom line. What I think you're going to hear from Representative Salazar and so many of us here is that communism kills. Communism has killed more than any other ideology in world history. Communism has killed more than fascism. Communism has killed more than imperialism, more than any other form of government. Communism has killed, and communism, in order for it to work, has to lead to authoritarianism. It has to, and it always has, and it always will. And whenever we have a segment of society that learns through blood and through authoritarianism that no matter how hard they work, no matter how hard they sacrifice, what they risk, no matter what they do, that government will take from them. And then you have another segment of society that learns that no matter how little they work, government will give to them. That is the death of freedom. And that's what happens under communism, because at the end of the day, you must have an authoritarian regime to decide who those winners are and who those losers are. And gee, it should be no surprise that that authoritarian regime always, throughout history, and always will, puts themselves first as the winners. And that's why in every communist regime, you see the regime enriching itself before the people that they're supposed to serve. Look, I think this bill is long overdue. I applaud you for it. Many of us who grew up in the Cold War learned and understood the threat that communism was. And since the end of that Cold War, I think that has really waned in our society and certainly in our schools. But now we are in a new Cold War with a new communist regime in the Chinese Communist Party. And we need to wake up to the threat that it is. I'm a Green Beret. The Green Berets were founded under John F. Kennedy. He knew that there would be groups of freedom fighters around the world that needed our help. The motto of the Green Berets is De Oppresso Liber, to free the oppressed. And whether that was in Yugoslavia, whether that was in South and Central America, everywhere that communism thrived, we had leadership in this city, we had leadership in the White House that committed Americans in uniform to go help those freedom fighters. But the fight starts here. And as Representative Crenshaw said, we talk a lot these days about what's taught in our schools, about having a clear eye and clear teaching of history, whether it was the plight of Native Americans or racism or slavery. Well, we need that same clear-eyed approach to the history of communism and the threat that it is. And I am proud to support you. I thank you for your leadership, and we will continue this fight. And that I hand over to
Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, like my colleague, I don't even know where to begin from a different perspective here. Ma'am, I represent one of the poorest counties in Florida. It's predominantly white. There are whole swaths that are rural, little access to internet, little access to broadband. The only county that actually declined in terms of its median income over time, and much like other counties in Middle America that have been gutted by the loss of manufacturing, that have been overrun with fentanyl, that have an opioid crisis. Are these constituents of mine privileged? It's a primarily Caucasian, I guess, county. Are they privileged
I certainly
systemically?
can't speak to individuals in your
Because I have to
district.
tell you, I think where you see the pushback coming here is that people being told that they're privileged because of their skin color or because of, I guess, their ancestry from hundreds of years ago came from Europe. They don't even know. I don't even know where my ancestors came from. But am I white, as the chairman asked? You don't know, right? We have to self-identify.
You have to
All right?
self-identify.
So I think the issue is multifold. One, we're historically a country of merit. And to hold people or to provide additional resources to one group based on a skin color because of things that have happened in the past and not to another, it's a zero sum in terms of resources. So are we excluding others because of their skin color or sexual orientation or what have you, and providing those resources to other as just an underlying philosophy in your office?
Thank you for the question. No, I will absolutely agree that we are a country where our ideal has been merit. But we have many, many examples of where that's not been the case. That is not the case.
Are we systemically a racist country? Is there systemic racism in the State Department? We'll just keep it within your purview.
We certainly have policies, processes, and procedures that we have to take a hard look at to ensure that that is not the case. I will give you an example, if
sure.
I may.
Quickly, though, please.
Yes, we have changed how we do our selection of one of the most important senior positions in the department, Deputy Assistant Secretary, which is senior, an ambassador comes back to that position, someone goes from that position to be an ambassador. Until the creation of our office, where we could have a look at and review the processes, those positions were not advertised. They were not competed. You had to be in the know or known and liked by someone to have even the knowledge.
Okay,
the
so we're going to
position
compete the
was-
position. Got it.
Right, but I'm
Great.
just, oh,
What does that have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion?
because the people who traditionally have been in the know
Yeah.
are largely from a single group. It's
What group?
knowledge. According to the numbers from GAO and our own demographic baseline, the majority of senior positions in the Department of State, over 80%, are held by European Americans. Over 50% are held by men.
Am I a European American?
Is your heritage from Europe?
What's that? I actually don't know.
Okay, then I can't answer that.
I actually don't know. I can tell you that I married into a Middle Eastern family. My son is half Arab. What box does he check for your office?
So we have expanded the options for self-identifying in the Department of State. There are now 16 options that include a Middle East, North African option. So if your son comes to work for the Department of State, he
I
can
gotcha.
identify that way.
So I think we're going to continue to proliferate boxes, right, as we continue to have a interracial country. I mean, we're the melting pot.
As you know, identifying Americans has been done from almost the very beginning of our nation, since 1790.
I know at some point it has to, at some point, I don't know when it stops.
Yeah.
When are we there?
Well, I think when we get our level playing field, when people are not making decisions on what we
I don't know
look
that
like or
we'll-
what our background is,
I yield
we'll
my
be
time.
fine.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to build on the obvious frustration you're hearing from this committee, General and Ms. Schaefer. Just a quick question for you. My understanding is military court-martials are public. Those proceedings and results of those proceedings are public, correct?
Representative, I'm not an expert on how that process occurs, but I do know at the end of the process of a court-martial, that record becomes part of the public domain.
It is. I would hope, Generals of the Army G357, you'd be very familiar, and I would certainly expect you, Ms. Schaefer, to be familiar. Non-judicial punishment is published. Of course the names are not published, but the act of non-judicial punishment is published. That's public information. I'm just telling you, I'm actually not asking you, I know it to be true, so.
It can be made public, that's right. That's
so
correct.
in this case, and there is a fundamental disconnect under this Department of Defense between taking responsibility and accountability. And we've seen that all the way from the top. So you're taking responsibility for basically mislabeling tens of thousands of Americans as extremists. But there's no accountability that you're willing to make us aware of. And as you know, as a commander of a unit, you have soldiers lose sensitive items, you have soldiers conduct misconduct, and the other soldiers don't see accountability. That's not good for unit cohesion and unit morale, is it?
We, Representative, that accountability is an important and vital process of maintaining good order and discipline. We use a wide variety of means.
In this case, has there been any accountability?
So again,
a number of which, not asking for names, don't want to violate anyone's privacy, but our constituents and taxpayers in a public forum deserve to know, yes or no, according to the determination of your investigation, was there any level of accountability?
Representative, I've made it clear that I'm not going to comment on specific actions taken by the chain of command. The chain of command concluded the investigation and followed through with actions appropriate to that chain of command.
I would encourage you to talk to the chief and talk to the Department of the Army. Your unwillingness to answer that question, which is clearly a policy decision you have made, not binding by us or anything statutory, is not only damaging to the public's view of the Army, and we're having a real problem with the public signing up to serve in the Army, it's also damaging with civil-military relations right now. I just want to address titling for a moment, since we're on the topic of extremism. And titling is a process where a soldier comes under investigation, not charged, not prosecuted, just merely under investigation, and they're essentially flagged in a series of databases. And there's been a real issue with those flags then getting lifted because the soldier isn't informed, maybe moves on to serve in other capacities, in civilian capacity that may need a background check, maybe seeks for re-enlistment, and they're barred. I mean, we have story after story that's come to this committee of lives ruined because of this secret flag that goes on their file and that they're made unaware of, but other agencies like the FBI and others doing background checks are. So because of a congressional inquiry, 2,200 soldiers who were flagged, never charged, were titled. Fortunately, due to the good work of this committee and the responsiveness of the Army, it was reduced significantly, but I'm worried about the broader policies still in place. So, Ms. Schaefer, going forward, will soldiers be notified of a titling designation in a prompt manner and given a chance to appeal it?
Sir, I'm not familiar with the specific policies related to that. But
you set policy for manpower.
Yes, I understand that. And I have heard that there had been an issue, but I don't know what the policies are in place. And
that's incredibly disturbing. I mean, that was a specific congressional inquiry that caused a 100-fold reduction.
It may have happened before I came into the seat.
Okay, among the penalties listed for when a soldier's titled is a denial of re-enlistment. So that could have obvious impacts on retention. So you would be unfamiliar with any type of due process there is for a soldier never charged who wishes to continue their service, but yet this titling activity takes place. You're unfamiliar.
I will look into it.
I would ask you to become very familiar. This has been incredibly disturbing. And come back to this committee with answers to those questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Banks, and Ranking Member Kim, to the General and to Dr. Schaefer.
You yield 5 minutes to Representative Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to start out and make something very clear to all of our witnesses, everybody watching, to my colleagues. We would not be having these conversations if we did not consistently, certainly, well, I'll say from my perspective, if I did not consistently have soldiers, cadets, family members, and their extended networks incredibly upset, disturbed, offended, and bringing us things like how to understand your whiteness and white rage, a lecture taught at West Point, taught by a woman who said the Republican Party today, not years ago, not in history as part of a history class, today is a party of white supremacy, that white people are outraged by the advancement of black people. A lecturer at the United States Military Academy. And I can go on, and Mr. Chairman, I'll enter all of these into the record. Orientation training at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Recommending to brand new impressionable cadets, don't say mom and dad, say parent, don't say boyfriend, girlfriend, say partner, don't say colorblind. I mean, we can go down the list. So I guess my point is, and to my colleagues as well, this isn't coming from us. I think deep down a lot of people think that Republican lawmakers are making this stuff up just to score political points. I would have no idea about any of it unless I had whole binders full that cadets and soldiers were bringing to us. So what you need to ask yourselves, and I said the same thing to your enlisted leaders across the services, why aren't they coming to your chain of command? I said this to the Air Force Academy superintendent. Why didn't they feel comfortable coming to him or his chain of command? Why did we have a conservative Muslim cadet who was disturbed and offended, didn't feel comfortable, or a Caucasian cadet who thought they would be canceled? You need to ask yourselves this as we deal with this recruiting crisis, and I ask you to pull those filters back and maybe look at kind of the other side of this equation. So we had the first African-American Secretary of Defense order a service-wide, entire department, 2.5 million members, stand down over extremism in the ranks. Yet, and we had a hearing in this committee on the same topic, yet a year later, the Pentagon's own study shows 100 service members out of 2.5 million. In case everybody wants to do the math, that's 0.0004% engaged in any form of extremism. And we hear a lot about, well, we need a military that reflects society. In fact, the military is overrepresented compared to society, with by 2020 figures, 20% African American compared to 13%, 18% Hispanic compared to 18%. So I'm trying to figure out what is the crisis that you're trying to address, Mr. Cisneros. We have less than 0.001% engaging in extremism. We have a representation, a strong representation, a proud representation of minorities within our ranks. Why this focus on DEI?
I don't think there's a crisis that we're trying to address, but we want to ensure that all individuals.
We had a training stand down from the Secretary of Defense as the first order.
Well,
not on accidents, not on planes crashing, not on ships crashing, although those things are happening. We didn't have service-wide stand-downs then. We had one on extremism in the ranks, though the own study showed no extremism. And we have an overrepresentation. We do have a military that reflects society.
There are
my
cases,
colleagues would assert.
You just said yourself, sir, that there are cases of extremism. Now, you may say it's like not that many, but I think 100
We lose more people in accidents.
100 cases of extremism.
Out of 2.5 million?
100 too many. I mean, we had an individual just this month that got sentenced for trying to, as a neo-Nazi who
and that's horrific. I want to be clear and on the record.
Yeah.
That should always be prosecuted. We should never stand for it any more than we should stand for those tweets. But I want to get, so the goal is the elimination then of any type of racism in the military? Because racism will always exist. So we have to look at priorities with limited dollars.
Well, I think we are looking at priorities, and Secretary Austin's priorities are defend the nation.
Can
take
I
care
just
of our
ask you
people,
very
and succeed
quickly,
through
what's the
teamwork.
difference in equality and equity?
Equality.
Equity is equal outcomes. How do you get equal outcomes in the United States military?
How do we get equal outcomes is by ensuring that everybody is treated equally. Ensuring that there is
that would be equal opportunity,
Well,
my friend. Equal outcomes is communism.
well, we want
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I'd like to yield 1 minute for the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues and I have led the charge on stopping Putin in the face of Biden's too little too late strategy. But before we go any further, we have asked for 4 simple things: a strategy to get us out of this stalemate, protect the U.S. border as a first principle, real burden sharings with the European, and a smart energy policy. We've got none of that, Mr. Speaker, yet 2.5 years into this war, we still don't know what success looks like. Is it Crimea? Is it all of the Donbass? Is it hold what you got? We don't know because President Biden won't tell us and the American people. We must close the U.S. border and defend it as a matter of first principle. It's not an either or, but it is a matter of priorities. We hear the EU and NATO are doing all it can. Baloney. They can't do more because only 11 out of 31 are contributing the bare minimum to its defense. And if they won't do it now, Mr. Speaker, then when will they? And most offensive, if we drive down the price of oil below $50 a barrel, Putin's war machine is done. I can no longer in good conscience, Mr. Speaker, ask the American people to dig deeper behind a blank check, behind bad strategy, bad policy. We just can't afford it anymore,
Gentleman's time has expired. The
time.
gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I was struck by a statement you just made, and I just want to touch on Representative Gates's concern about readiness. I'm the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee. I mean, I understand there is a quality over quantity argument, but the basic issue is if they can't fly, that is a strategic failing on our part. And I think the Pentagon has become so focused on, I know it's a balance, I know there's a pendulum swing, but on making these kind of handmade, bespoke, high-tech Ferraris, but sometimes you need a fleet of pickup trucks. And you certainly need, whether they're Ferraris or pickup trucks, that can operate in the desert and can operate out in the corrosive environment in the Pacific. So let's talk about some of your pickup trucks. The Air Force owns and operates DOD's largest fleet of commercial derivative aircraft. They use commercial parts. This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, they need a high school diploma. It's not anything high tech about this. All of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000. This is a $90,000 bag of bushings that you need for any jet turbine engine just to operate. So the exorbitant cost due to DOD only buying commercial parts from the OEMs, which is essentially sole source, is literally driving us out of business. I mean, the interest on our debt alone is now exceeding, for the first time in American history, the entire defense budget. We can't afford it anymore. So with FAA compliant parts, you cut the cost in half or even more. So my question is, why can't, these are commercial birds out there. By the way, it has all kinds of implications for contested logistics when you can access commercial parts in the middle of a war, potentially in the Pacific. Why can't we use FAA compliant? I mean, it's the safety standard leader in the world. Why can't we do that?
I don't know a reason why we couldn't. I'm familiar with some of the issues you're trying to raise here. from my previous position.
Yeah.
Where
I know you are.
Defense-
That's why I'm
Defense-
asking you.
Yeah, Defense Logistics Agency used to report to me. That's where we do a lot of our parts acquisition. And we had an issue when I was there with people gouging us, basically, charging us too much for parts. And we ended up, I think, in court over it.
What can we, just in the interest of time, Secretary, come back to us? How can this committee help you fix that? We literally can't
I'd be happy
afford
to
the
take that.
modernization, the
We'll
recruiting,
have to
the
work with-
basing, everything we need if we're paying $90,000 for a bag of bushings.
I work with Dr. LaPlante on this because it's a systemic issue, and again, most of the parts buying is done through DLA.
But you have the largest fleet of commercial birds that,
Well,
right? You've got the Ferraris, but these are the pickup trucks, and we should just be able
what
to
we
buy
have to
from.
be able to do is challenge the prices. And we have to have knowledgeable buyers who can understand when they're getting a ridiculous price and go in and ensure that they get.
Let's work
data to
together on that.
justify
I
the
just
price.
need, in the interest of time, I just want to move again to the recruiting and the Genesis program. I have here a quote that was given during the Air and Space Forces Association Air Warfare Symposium that basically says if you do the math, you're somewhere in the ballpark of 5,600 folks that we could have likely brought on if they weren't waiting on a medical approval, right? And now you have a program that digs into medical records, and so a kid who took ADHD meds because maybe his parents got divorced when he was 14 or 15 now can't get approved. Somebody who wants to serve, I think we're trying to solve one problem, and then we've created a whole disproportionate others. And I want to work with you on that. Let's fix the Genesis system and how it is affecting you. And then just in my question remaining, you are the only service that in your proposal proposed a cut in junior ROTC in high schools. Do you think that junior ROTC in high school is getting to this Gen Z, getting to them early about service, leadership, discipline, followership is helpful?
Junior ROTC is a valuable program. I'm not aware that we made a cut. We may have for some reason. I'd have to go back and get back to you.
I look forward to working with you on that as well. You get a better citizen and you get a recruit.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, last summer I had the privilege of traveling to Japan.
Thank you. Mr. Waltz is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And here's where I think we're really talking past each other. This war is not done. It's not over. This is a war against Islamic extremism. It's a war against an ideology. And just as it took decades, not 20 years, not 30 years, many more, to defeat the idea of communism, to defeat the idea of fascism, it's going to take decades to defeat the idea of Islamic extremism. General McKenzie, you testified yesterday, Al-Qaeda is still at war with us. Do you stand by that statement?
Absolutely, Representative.
DNI Haynes, Biden's director of national intelligence, briefed the Congress that Al-Qaeda fully intends to attack the West again if given the chance. The head of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden's former deputy, has pledged allegiance to the head of the Taliban. Except now they have an entire state to work with, an army, an air force, a functioning international airport. And I think if things continue on the path they are, possibly billions in international currency reserves. So, Mr. Chairman, respectfully, we're not done with this war. I would have thought we would have learned the lesson from Iraq. I would have thought, Mr. Secretary, you would learn the lesson from Iraq, where we pulled out in 2011. Mr. Chairman, you issued a statement praising that pullout as ending that war, and yet we found ourselves 3 years later with soldiers going back in. So, but let's look at the situation, because I think the American people need to understand this. Here we have Iraq. We pulled out, led to the rise of the ISIS caliphate, which was obviously a morphed entity from Al-Qaeda. Look at all of the bases that we had to deal with when we went back. We had bases in the Gulf. We had bases in Kuwait. We had bases in Turkey, in Jordan, of course in Israel, allied bases in Cyprus. We had allies on the ground in the Kurds. We didn't let ISIS take over the government in Baghdad and the army and all of the functions of the state. We had all of these assets to work with to go clean up that mess. And how many soldiers and lives did we lose from cleaning up that mistaken withdrawal, Mr. Chairman. But let's transition over here to Afghanistan. What do we see? Do we have, General McKenzie, do we have a single base in Afghanistan now?
We have no base in it.
Do we have a base in any country neighboring Afghanistan?
We do not.
Do we have any local allies approaching the capability of the Kurds?
We do not. There may be some options, but we do not.
We have the Northern Alliance. The Panjshir has been taken. Frankly, they're being slaughtered right now as we speak with our weapons, with our damn equipment. Our allies are being slaughtered. Every morning we wake up to beheading videos, to executions, to people being hunted down with our own database. But when and if you have to present options to the president, how many soldiers are we going to lose? Because we have no allies on the ground, we have no bases in the region. Now we're going to get to really the crux of the issue, which is over-the-horizon counterterrorism. Those drones have to fly all the way around Iran and all the way up Pakistan and lose 70 to 80% of their fuel before they even get anywhere near a target. And we just saw from the failed attack, the botched attack, that you have to have multi-intelligence confirming what that drone operator's seeing. I've called it in, and I know that drone operator would have appreciated somebody on the ground saying, no, that's a civilian, don't pull that trigger. So I appreciate your candor in saying how difficult this is going to be, but the President of the United States is selling this country a fiction that we can do over here with nothing, what we're doing over here with neighboring base access, with allies on the ground, and with ocean access. That is a fiction that I think you all need to own, and we need to be honest with the American people. I am just livid at the fact of the future Americans that are going to have to go back to clean up this mess. We are watching this horror movie that Representative Slotkin experienced, that we all experienced after Iraq. The president continues to say, well, we can do what we do in Somalia. We can do what we do in Syria. Mr. Secretary, you just briefed about a strike in Syria. We have a lot more capability there. One more question. Do we have any evidence, intelligence or otherwise, of Pakistani troops on the ground, intelligence officers, air support, or any troops on the ground assisting the Taliban, or command and control assisting the Taliban offensive?
I'd prefer to answer that question in closed session.
I'll take that as a yes. And Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waltz, your time has expired.
that's not going to go to a civil war. It's going to go to a regional war.
And just for the record, we're not going to put words in the mouths of our witnesses. You can't take it as a yes if it was not, in fact, a yes. Ms. Escobar is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you so much for...
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognize Mr. Waltz from Florida.
Madam Secretary, thank you for coming in. In preparation for the hearing, I watched your appearance on The View, and after one of the hosts was kind of condescending and insulting the intelligence of the 74 million people that voted for President Trump, you talked about, because they were talking about how the prices of everything are so high. You talked about, well, in response, what the American people need to do is take advantage of tax credits to weatherize their homes and take advantage of credits to buy EVs. I found it kind of astounding because I didn't hear anything in your response, and I want to give you a chance today to talk about how the American people need to deal with this. Energy and federal government spending are the two greatest drivers of inflation, and it is eating Americans alive. They can't afford rent. They can't afford groceries. They can't afford electricity, right there in your wheelhouse. They can't afford gas. So how are we, with the energy prices so high, with spending so high on a lot of these credits, by the way, EVs only make up 1% of the cars on the road, how are we driving down prices to help the American people?
Yeah, we are really obsessed with reducing prices for people too, and totally get it.
But Madam Secretary, it's not working.
But, well,
I mean, the inflation rate's up almost 20%.
Inflation
Gasoline's up 55%.
inflation is coming down. When you say from what point is gasoline up 55%? I don't know what your measurement is from the start of the administration.
Gas prices are high. I mean, you look at where they were in the mid-2s to now the mid-3s.
Yeah, the mid-2s were in the middle of a pandemic. All those prices that you're talking about, they're in the middle of a pandemic when prices are through the floor. It's not a normal time. However, let me say, we are obsessed with making sure we bring down prices for people.
Madam Secretary, I appreciate, I only get 5 minutes on behalf of the people I represent. I appreciate that you're obsessed with it. What you're doing isn't working. These prices are still unacceptably high.
Okay. This is why the president has focused on every way possible to help reduce prices for people. This means whether it is on prescription drugs or whether it is weatherizing your home to reduce your electricity bill, whether it's helping people to be able to get an electric car so they don't have to pay gasoline prices, whether it is reducing student loans, every pocket of way the president is trying to reduce costs
Except that he's doing that by printing money and throwing federal dollars at the problem. You got one group of Americans paying student loans for another group. You got one group of Americans paying through their taxes EVs for another group, which, by the way, are not environmentally sound in terms of the materials that go in them. And I would encourage you to read the book Red Cobalt that talks about the 40,000 children that work in the cobalt mines of Congo, some as young as 6. But let's just stick with prices for a moment. Clearly hasn't worked here. But let's talk about abroad. The intelligence community has confirmed for me that, and a number of analysts have confirmed, I mean, obviously Russia fuels its economy on oil and gas. Iran fuels its economy on oil and gas. At about $55 a barrel, Russia can no longer fuel its war machine. It actually goes into kind of economic survival mode. So wouldn't it make sense to flood the global market with cleaner, you admitted in prior testimony, American gas is cleaner than what came through Nord Stream 2, correct?
Correct, it's cleaner.
So why wouldn't we flood the world with cleaner, cheaper American oil and gas, drive down the prices? Now you've not only solved what's going on with the Iranian-supported terrorists in the Middle East, you put Putin on his back foot as well in terms of the war in Ukraine. You've now solved 2 global problems and the inflation problem here at home, but instead the climate agenda is counter to all of that. We're restricting our supply, and then we're allowing Iran to pump to China. We're allowing Venezuela to pump. Russia is pumping more than it ever has through India and China, for that matter, into Europe. How does this make sense?
This is so curious to me, because we are the #1 producer of oil and gas. We are the #1 exporter.
But we could be pumping so much more if we weren't tapping the brakes in Anwar, we weren't putting a ban.
Oil dominance. We are doing more than the previous administration, significantly.
How much more could we be doing?
Well,
Madam Secretary, how much more could we be doing? Because
the
price of oil is still hovering around 80. Demand is still out there. That's why the price of oil and gas are still so high.
Correct.
That's why everybody's still buying Russian oil and Iranian oil.
But it is not this administration that is hampering the production of oil and gas. I mean, you can make that face, but we are #1 in the world. We are at record levels.
Okay, we're at 13. Could we be at 15 million a day? Could we be at 16? Could we be at 17?
Nobody's stopping.
Just final question, Mr. Chairman. I just had lunch with the Speaker of the Parliament of Lithuania. She was in near panic mode. Lithuania, right on the front line, probably next after Ukraine with Russia. She said, Congressman, we buy 85% of our gas through the terminals in Louisiana and in Texas. These are bought on very long-term contracts. We're having to think 10 years out. She said, I don't know what to do with the ban.
There is not a ban.
She said, I'm going to have to start looking elsewhere.
We have spoken with
our allies believe it's a ban.
No, they don't. We have spoken with them. They do not believe it's a ban. It is not a ban. It is.
I encourage her to come talk to you.
Update an analysis of what's in the public interest. Nothing is stopping from what is currently being exported.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes.
And Madam Secretary, let me go back and correct something.
United States District Court for the District of Columbia opinion in RNC versus Nancy Pelosi, rendered by Judge Tim Kelly, rejecting, obliterating, and demolishing every argument that we heard from Mr. Perry and Mr. Biggs. Their whole argument seems to be that Republicans were entitled to blow off subpoenas of the United States Congress that came from the January 6th committee because they didn't like the committee, they didn't think it was legitimate, they thought it was not validly authorized. The courts roundly and uniformly rejected those arguments. So now they purport to render the law for themselves. If they don't want to comply with the subpoena, they won't, and yet they would now hold other witnesses like Hunter Biden to a standard they won't accept for themselves. That's a remarkable thing. I started off this hearing, Mr. Chairman, by saying we believe that everybody should respond in good faith to the subpoenas of the United States Congress. Now, Mr. Biden asserts that he responded in good faith to what you repeatedly publicly asked him to do. And he's at least got an arguable, colorable claim that that's true. All the case law I've been able to read, Mr. Chairman, suggests that the committee is supposed to engage in good faith negotiation with witnesses, which is precisely what the January 6th committee did. The dates don't always work out. The times don't always work out. Some people want to assert a privilege. Some people don't. There are certain questions that are agreed to or not. So there are negotiations. But as I read at the beginning of this
Will
hearing,
the gentleman take a question?
but I will as soon as I get to that.
Excuse me, it's my time.
Oh.
Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Why is the committee not engaged in that negotiation with Hunter Biden? I just don't understand that. I mean, he's a guy who appears to be 99% willing to do what you even asked him to do in the written subpoena, but he's given 100% good faith compliance with what you repeatedly publicly challenged him to do. So I don't understand why you won't meet with them and work it out, which is what every court in the land has said. The courts don't want to be involved in all this stuff, especially when you've got a guy like him who's overwhelmingly complying with what you're asking for, unlike all of these colleagues on the other side of the aisle who unfortunately 100% defied the subpoenas of the United States Congress, which is what they did. And I don't think those people should be able to vote on any subpoena relating to any witness in this committee until they render cooperation with the January 6th committee and come forth and tell us what they know. Now, there's another point that I need to make, and I want to thank Mr. Connolly for his indulgence here. Our good friend, the gentlelady from Georgia, referred to the murder of Ashley Babbitt. Well, the Department of Justice, the United States Attorney, and the U.S. Capitol Police Inspector General all rejected the idea that there was any
Point
murder.
of order, Mr. Chairman. Or inquiry.
There's no such thing.
There's never been a court hearing.
Mr. Chairman, we agreed.
Michael Byrd was never charged.
Reclaiming order here. The time is Mr. Conley's. I yield back to Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But I will submit for the record a document entitled Department of Justice Closes Investigation into the Death of Ashley Babbitt. United States Capitol Police document USCP completes internal investigation into the January 6th officer-involved shooting. I think it was a scandal. It was a tragedy that people died because Donald Trump put them at risk, as many of the former insurrectionists are now willing to say publicly, that he said you got to go and you got to fight and fight like hell, or you will not have
time's expired,
anymore.
Mr. Conley's
So,
time's expired.
I'm sorry
Mr.
that
Conley's
people lost
time
their
is
lives.
expired. Mr. Conley's time is expired. Order, order.
I was trying to reclaim the time the gentlelady stole from me.
Oh, we stopped the clock. I watched it. I'm paying close attention. I do feel compelled to respond to this. We have engaged in good faith negotiations. We've offered every witness a narrow scope of topics, documents in advance. They can choose the date. Hunter Biden's lawyer has not engaged with the committee regarding Hunter Biden. Chair now recognizes Mr. Waltz.
Did you respond to their
our
letters
newest
to
member,
offer to
for 5
cooperate,
minutes.
sir? Mr. Chairman, did you respond to the lawyer's offer to cooperate with the committee and meet with the committee?
Do what? Yeah, Chair recognizes Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an incredible first hearing with this committee.
Welcome to the Oversight Committee.
It was, but you know, I mean, this was entirely predictable. I think what we were going to hear and see today. We saw that Hunter came and staged a PR stunt with my friend from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz. That was clearly organized and recognized. But what I'm hearing from the ranking member and his colleagues that claim that transcripts are subject to, quote, partisan and twisted leaks and distortions is incredibly rich. Let's talk about calling the kettle black first. The country suffered through an entire impeachment proceeding of a president of the United States because of a false dossier in a SCIF, a compartmented facility where every hearing and every transcript started with, this is an unclassified proceeding, then to have it selectively leaked and lied to the American people to the great damage to this nation, but then bring it to this committee because I'm new. I watched yesterday as committee Democrats continued to spin false narratives, several of which went out just yesterday as interviews were ongoing with Hunter Biden's art dealer, which is rich in and of itself, that Congressman Golden on the other side of the aisle went to the press during the interviews and spun a narrative while it was going on, but he conveniently omitted that 70% of the art buyers were Biden donors. So we can go down the line and talk about
false,
spin.
Sir. That's not the facts.
But the other thing that we're hearing today, well, member so-and-so, Congressman so-and-so, Congressman Jordan, they didn't comply with their subpoenas. But let's have a quick lesson on the Constitution. Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution, the Speech and Debate Clause, essentially protects all of us from abiding by each other's subpoenas. Otherwise, this body would do nothing but subpoena each other. So I would encourage my colleagues to look up Article 1, Section 6 and look at the case law of the Speech and Debate Clause and why my colleagues rightfully did not abide by that subpoenas. But let's talk about precedent for a moment of a president's son abiding by lawful subpoenas of the Congress. Donald Trump Jr. came before this body. He came before the House Intelligence Committee. He came before the House Judiciary Committee. He came before the Senate Intelligence Committee twice. He came before the so-called Jan 6 Committee, all behind closed doors where lawyers can sit down, both sides of the aisle, and have a conversation, go through documents, all under oath, which is the precedent for any committee. Don Jr. came before committees and came before this body 5 times behind closed doors. What is Hunter Biden afraid of? What won't he do? And Ranking Member Raskin, you're going to reap what you sow, my friend. I mean, you insisted on depositions for those who appeared before the Jan 6 committee when Steve Bannon agreed to testify publicly. You argued, sir, that he should have to sit for a closed-door interview, just like every other witness. Quote, the way we have treated every single witness is the same. They come in behind closed doors. They talk to the committee there. You said on an interview in front of CBS in 2022, but now that Republicans are doing the same process, following House rules, doing the investigating, somehow Hunter Biden, because he's a Biden, should be held to a different standard. At the end of the day, we had a government official and the President of the United States, a vice president, set up 30 shell companies. Why? What product did those companies sell? Nothing. Vice President Biden was charged with 2 countries in his portfolio, China and Ukraine. While the vice president, his son, traveled on official business on Air Force Two and received massive monetary contributions afterwards. We have laws in place, colleagues, that prevent foreign powers from influencing government officials. Were policies changed as a result of the dinners, the calls, the text messages that we know President Biden engaged in through his son. We have a duty to get to the bottom of it. We will reference this contempt, and we will see if the Attorney General will uphold a fair standard of the law.
The time's up, Mr. Chairman.
And prosecute Hunter Biden.
Time's
Thank you, Mr.
expired.
Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett for 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. So we love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Siegel?
Whatever you want, Congressman. I'm
What is it?
good. Thank you.
Siegel?
Sigilly.
All right, start with you. I think you would well know that I was just reviewing Joint Pub 3.0, Joint Operations, a foundation of joint operations in the military, and nowhere in there does it call for diversity of command. It does call for unity of command, and it talks a lot about unit morale and the need for unity within our military units. You testified earlier that you haven't seen Marxism, critical race theory. You don't know where it is in the military or where it is at West Point. Is that accurate characterization?
I had not heard of it when I was at West Point, teaching there for 2 decades. I had not heard of it until it became a national issue.
When did you leave West Point?
I stopped teaching there in 2019.
Okay. So you're unaware then that Critical Race Theory 101 is part of the West Point curriculum? According to, and I'd like to enter into the record,
I'm not
a
quite
letter.
sure what, you're saying that there's a department of critical race theory?
No, there is it's part of the syllabus, excuse me.
The part of the syllabus for what, Congressman?
For one of the classes at West Point.
Well, no, I think that that's absolutely true, that for one class, for one elective, it certainly could be.
Do you agree with the lecture, Understanding Your Whiteness and White Rage, taught by Dr. Carol Anderson of Emory University, that should be taught at West Point?
I'm not familiar with that lecture.
The
thing
essentially,
is that,
the theme is that white people are enraged. Not 100 years ago, not 40 years ago, which you're talking about, the 60s and 70s. Today, white cadets, white people are enraged by black advancement.
Well, I think, Congressman, the great thing about education is that you can get a variety of different perspectives.
Sure.
It's not training, which is what some of my colleagues have talked about. I'm talking about education. You want to hear the broadest representation of every viewpoint.
Do you
so that
understand?
You can hear that.
I know this is the very clever approach of the left to conflate history with current day training. So would you agree that critical race theory is a foundation for DEI?
No, I would not. I don't know that to be true. DEI, it goes back to equal opportunity. In the early part of the 1970s, it's still just a part of what equal opportunity, I would say.
What's the difference in equity and equality? Equal opportunity, which is, so right now, the Director of National Intelligence, how infused this ideology has become across our national security apparatus, the Director of National Intelligence has an Office for Equal Opportunity, which, for the record, I fully agree with. I want every American, race, religion, socioeconomic background, to have an equal opportunity to serve. They also have an Office of DEI, including equity. What's the difference in equity?
Well, I would say that when this started as a historian, it started as a Defense Race Relation Institute and then became the Defense Equal Opportunity.
What's the difference in equity and equality? Equal opportunity to serve and equity, which is an equal outcome for all.
I would again say that the equal opportunity, which at least at West Point, when I was there and started the DEI
I'm all for
program,
equal opportunity.
But the equal opportunity program falls under the DEI at West Point.
What's equity?
I don't know what, Congressman.
You're here as an expert today, the Democratic witness. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of there's a DEI office in the Pentagon, a chief
there's
DEI office.
DEI in many
And
of
you
those.
don't know what equity. You can't testify to what equity means. Well, I'll tell you, since you don't know.
Thank you, Congressman.
It is equal outcomes for all, which is a hallmark of Marxism. DEI is Marxist-based, as is critical race theory, but let's progress, since, apparently the expert doesn't know what equity is in DEI. I have here, I'd like to enter for the record, a class composition with racial goals for West Point. You just testified, you were under oath, you were in the admissions office.
I was there. I wasn't in the admissions office. I was on the admissions committee for 1 year, and I know that there were no quotas, is what I said, Congressman.
So we're going to parse over quotas and goals. This is from the superintendent, and here's the goals, and it has African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, women, with percentages We have red here for when they missed those goals. That's
As I said, Congressman,
That's
there
an
are
issue.
no quotas on the, when I was on the admissions committee, there were no
Let's
quotas.
also
There is
enter into
also,
the record-
Congressman, the ability to have athletes on there. So there are many other goals on there, as I'm sure you've seen, on what are the other. And if you could go read all of those goals, it would tell you how deep that is. And in fact,
Here's
one of
the
the
problem.
largest number of people that are recruited at West Point are athletes, 25%.
Here's the problem. When you have in any elite institution, when you say, and your directive is to advance one group based on the skin color, you have to take those slots from another group based on their skin color.
And
it's
Congressman,
a zero sum.
But the largest of those groups is the athletes.
It's a zero sum. Oh, well, the athletes get broken down by their skin color.
And
In this chart.
25%.
In this chart that
of
you
those.
just said doesn't exist, but let's continue. This is my time. Here, just to go how system-wide, Mr. Chairman, here's a memorandum from the Secretary of the Air Force with white, black, Asian, American Indian. I mean, I think my wife, who's an Army veteran, who is Arab, she didn't have a place, I guess, in this chart. My son, who's now multiracial, I don't know if he would have probably looks white to most people. I don't know that he would have a place. But here, you have current percentages and a mandate to increase those percentages. You have to then take those slots, whether they're pilot slots or whatever, from someone else based on ethnicity. This is signed by the now chairman of the Joint Chiefs, C.Q. Brown, signed by the Secretary of the Air Force with the mandate, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. With a mandate, you are directed to develop. Mr. Chairman, would you mind yielding?
I'll yield him all of my time. I'll yield him all of my
Mr.
time.
Chairman, if it's okay if I could have
That's
the
okay.
rest.
Well,
I just want to get this on the record because I think we've had some very misleading testimony today. With the mandate, you are directed to develop a DEI plan within 30 days and report back annually based on percentages. This is illegal, it's wrong, and it's divisive. Finally, I just want to ask as a matter, here are some of the key proponents of CRT, which basically says to be less white is to be less racially oppressive. To be white, no member of society is innocent. What these authors say is that if you're white, you are incapable of not being racist. That in and of itself is racist, sir. And by the way, these were lecturers at the Air Force Academy. That is divisive, and it's wrong, and it's destructive. And finally, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. We have data that shows, as Mr. Lohmeyer has testified to, 62% of active duty military members are seeing a politicized military. 65% will recommend their child not join, and now we're in a recruiting crisis. This is why these hearings are so necessary. And you are right, Mr. Siegel, in that Congress drives change. This Congress has banned critical race theory in the military in this defense bill. We have eliminated the hiring of divisive DEI bureaucrats. We are going to drive this change to get our military back to a meritocracy with equal opportunity for all. You cannot fight racism with more racism, and you have to have data. Final question, Mr. Chairman. Do you, General Siegel, have any data that shows that a more or less diverse submarine bomber brigade is more lethal or less lethal? Let's go with the submarine crew.
Congressman, I know that a submarine's lethality comes with its nuclear weapons. We have the most lethal.
No, I'm talking about the crew. You have to have people to operate it.
Right, and I would go back to my area of expertise, which is in the early 1970s, when we did not have that lethality then. And,
But
and
today-
the reason that we didn't have that lethality then is because we did not have policies that allowed us to have that.
We're now 50 years beyond that.
And the reason that
Do you
we're
have
so
any
good
data
is we've
that
had those
shows-
policies. Those policies have
Do you
made
have
us as
any data
successful
that
as we
shows
are right now.
by percentage, a more or less, let's say bomber crew, let's say brigade, whether it's 50% black, 10% black, 30% Jewish, any of these societal factors,
data that drives readiness?
I would say that the only way we can have an equal force that is ready and able is to recruit that force. And if we can't recruit that force from the entire country and have leadership that reflects that, then we are not going to be a successful military. But we are a successful military in part because some of these policies allow us to recruit and retain the greatest Americans
I'll take
in the
that
country.
for the record that there is no actual data. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you much. I guess we have a couple minutes for Mr. Comer left.
I have 2 more minutes if you want to. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Take it, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. You're the expert. Go ahead.
Let's go with, just for the record, with General Burt here and how politicization is infusing our military. This is General Burt from your service, Mr. Lohmeyer, and I'd like you to comment on this, who stated publicly at a forum that she is compelled to consider different candidates who are perhaps less qualified if they disagree with state law. Can you talk about the implications of civilian oversight of the military if we have a 3-star general, active duty, in front of a large crowd, live streamed, talking about sending less qualified people to certain states because of their state laws? And should the military now be able to opine? For example, this is the Pandora's box that is being opened, that if maybe I don't like the Second Amendment laws or the gun restriction laws in a certain location, that I should now be able to self-select with the military to go to a different place?
Thank you, Congressman. One of the points that General Sigilly made earlier was that he was unaware of the many hundreds of senior military leaders ever saying anything aught of Senator Tuberville's hold on confirmations. And I suppose, generally speaking, that's fair enough, but during that same time period is when General Deanna Burt made the comments you're referring to, and it was overtly political. And I'll tell you from my own experience while in the Space Force is that the entire time I was there, this is one of the respected leaders in the Space Force to whom people looked, trusted as a warfighter because she was talented as a warfighter, but the moment you make a statement like that, you lose trust, confidence of the vast majority of people under your command.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I think we hear this from the other side of the aisle quite a lot. Well, we have to put this all into context, and there were a lot of mistakes made in the 20 years of war, and frankly, I think that's a sad deflection from the mistakes that were made, the debacle that this withdrawal was. I could fill this room with think tank reports and studies, some of which you authored, Mr. Kalinda, and that I participated in the Pentagon back under the Bush administration, which, by the way, talks began in the Bush administration, they continued in the Obama administration, all to varying degrees. And then we hear about, as we're hearing from the other side about, well, it was really about Doha. And heck, we even just saw that in President Biden's after action review. But at the end of the day, and this is the fact that people just can't get over, is President Trump's national security team went into him and said the Taliban are not living up to it, and he did not withdraw. They didn't live up to their end of the bargain, and therefore we stopped. And then we hear, well, the administration, the Biden administration didn't have any choice. They had no problem with getting back into the Paris Accord. They had no problem reversing course on Iran. They had no problem reversing course on the border. Heck, they even canceled an entire pipeline on day one. But yet we're supposed to be, we're supposed to believe that they had no choice when it came to Afghanistan. It's a bunch of crap. It's a garbage argument, and I think deep down, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle know it in their hearts. So let's just stick to the fact at hand of this withdrawal and how it was handled. Colonel Crumrick, you are a senior staff officer in Central Command, and you're testifying that President Biden ignored the military advice of 3 4-star generals, General Miller, General McKenzie, and General Milley, correct?
That is correct.
And it's safe to articulate that our soldiers, their loved ones, were asked to do 2 conflicting missions: to completely get everything out as fast as possible in a full withdrawal, but yet also facilitate an evacuation. Is that accurate, correct?
That is correct.
Sergeant Major, you're testifying that your best military advice on using Bagram instead of HKIA was also ignored. Is that correct?
That's not the way it happened, sir. We did not do it out of Bagram.
And on Bagram, and this is critical to the family sitting behind you, was the prison holding 7,000 of the most hardened terrorists, including the suicide bomber that killed their loved ones at Abbey Gate, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And were you aware of any contingency planning? The Afghans were guarding it, but they needed the base for power, for life support, for supplies. Were you aware of any contingency planning as the Taliban are closing in on Kabul to deal with those prisoners should that prison fall or should they be released? Were you aware of any contingency planning? Anyone?
I was not, sir.
And Colonel Crump, finally, I'll just ask you, were you aware of any contingency planning to deal with our SIVs, key Afghans like ministry officials, journalists, women, activists, people that the Taliban would obviously had targeted for 20 years and would continue? Were you aware, or, including, heck, our own U.S. citizens, any contingency planning as part of this rapid withdrawal to get those folks out should our assumptions that the Afghan government could hold and the military and the Afghan military would hold would fail? Any contingency planning along those lines?
No, and it became very painfully obvious under extreme duress how big of a gap that was.
So this was an utter lack of planning that their loved ones paid the ultimate price for, and that our Afghan allies right now today are being hunted down as we speak, are still paying the price for, and future American soldiers have to go up and to go back and clean up this mess, as we've had to do in Iraq from the Obama administration decisions. I mean, there's a direct causality there, in your opinion.
There is.
Thank you. And what would happen to a leader in the military who ignored intelligence and failed to plan, in this case till the day before, resulting in troops killed? What would happen?
They would get court-martialed.
How does it make you feel that not a single official has resigned, been relieved, been court-martialed, even laterally transferred? Heck, how does that make you feel?
Terrible, and I would like one to take responsibility. You know, when JFK had the Bay of Pigs, he came out and said, the buck stops with me. You know, I am—
Not only are they not taking responsibility, President of the United States saying it's outstanding success, so it should at least Secretary Blinken, with the State Department in charge of this operation, in your opinion, at least resign? He's not going to be fired by the president. Should he at least resign?
I can't speak of what he should do, but I would say that senior leaders definitely need to be held accountable in that organization.
Well, they're not under this administration, Colonel, but this committee will not let this go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence, both chairmen, and to our families. We will not let this go. As long as I sit in this seat, we will drive accountability for you and for your loved ones. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz. We now yield 5 minutes to Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for again, digging into this important topic. And I think we've heard some statistics, some grumbling on the other side of the aisle that, you know, we're having another wokeness hearing. I just want to restate again that when cadets, military families, active duty members stop bringing us these issues, then we'll stop talking about it. But as long as they are, we have a duty to address these issues. So I want to just talk about data and what data you have or don't have. Because what I'm looking at, just along those lines that I just discussed, is poll. Nearly 7 in 10 active service members have witnessed politicization in the military. We have another poll from Heritage that 68% have witnessed significant or somewhat political activity in the military. We have 63% of active duty members say they would not recommend their child to join. That's a double hit. That could be a retention issue, and a recruiting issue. We have a report on the National Independent Panel of Military Service and Readiness. We have the Reagan Institute, where the Secretary of Defense and Chairman just spoke. Perceived politicization drives declining confidence in the military. The top response is military leadership becoming overly politicized with 62%. This includes 60% of registered Democrats, 60% of independents, 65% of Republicans, saying that this leadership is over-politicizing what should be an apolitical body. That's an issue, and we have to address that issue. So I asked last year all of the vices, many of them now are the chiefs, and all of the senior enlisted advisors, if they had any data, polling, focus groups for recruits and why they're not joining, and what's going on. We have a lot of narratives that you've all espoused, COVID, declining bodies or what have you, but does anyone disagree with the vice chiefs that you don't have regular polling and regular focus groups?
Representative Waltz, we do regular polling. Through our jammers, we look at and we engage with young people to understand what drives propensity and why they would not serve. For example, for reasons why they serve, they join for pay and for money and for education and for the benefits and for travel and for health benefits, all of those positive things. But the reasons why they choose not to serve is fear.
That's polling people that join. I'm looking at a recruit that may have signed up, may have clicked, may have talked, and then didn't.
Representative, we're actually looking at the community of people who are that we're going out to recruit and trying to understand what drives them as well. And so why are reasons not to join? Fear of injury and death, the risk of post-traumatic stress.
Is that what date is this poll? Because all your vice chiefs, now chiefs, said we don't do it. And now I've got think tanks that are doing it.
So Chairman, Representative Waltz, I'd be happy to come and brief you on this research. It's research that we do annually and continuously in geographic markets. But
why is the military leadership unaware of it? Why can't they speak to it, including the senior enlisted advisors?
Representative, I will take that on. That should be my responsibility.
Okay, so let me ask you this, just in the little bit of time I have remaining. I don't mean to cut you off. Why do we have, with the Army in a recruiting crisis, 50-year low, what data drove the calling, which was a cartoon of a young lady with two moms that basically, said, and then she joined. Is there a body of LGBTQ or of service members with LGBTQ parents that we were targeting? And if so, what was that target audience and how many then joined? Ms. Schaefer.
Sir, this predated me. I'm familiar with the commercial, but I don't know the genesis of it or why they...
Wasn't that the main recruiting effort for the Army for at least a year? Because it's now shifted.
The calling was before me.
Congressman, if I could jump in on this.
Sure.
2 years, 2022 and 2021 of Gallup polling nationally shows that 20% of young Americans under 25 consider themselves part of the LGBTQ community. That's exactly the market that we're looking to recruit
do you
from.
collect then, I mean, Air Force or Army, do you know how much of the Air Force or how much of the Army identifies as LGBTQ? What percentage?
I'll take that for the record.
So you don't know?
I don't know offhand, but...
you knew the Gallup poll, but you don't know within your service? Do you collect that data?
I don't believe that we actually ask
think you do.
Minors within
Was
our
there a
service.
body within the military that then, that you wanted to be sure felt comfortable? Because this was the main effort from the Army, and they're 45,000 short.
Congressman, our recruiting is trying to reach the broadest swath of the American people possible. When large percentages identify, we want them to see
Mr. Wagner, it's not working. It's not working, and now the Army has had a wholesale shift back to jumping out of planes and kicking in doors, which I would argue historically is what soldiers want to do. So I'm trying to get at what data is driving this shift. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.